My work with residents and pediatricians is so near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time at Children's Hospital while I was at 0 to 3, precepting residents in actual encounters so I could really get a feel for what the opportunity was to connect with parents and use that encounter, whether it was a well child visit or even a sick visit, to help parents understand what makes their children tick and to try to address, the myriad challenging behaviors that, crop up in the early years. So I'm thrilled to do this. And with no further ado, I'm going to share my slides. If nothing else, parents and pediatricians get from me in thinking about how to support big reactors is how to stay calm and be their rock as they are spiraling. So there you have it.
You did it very well, very admirable. I'm
Okay.
impressed. I also forgot to mention you're doing questions in the Q&A. If anyone wants to drop them in, I will be monitoring them for Claire throughout the talk. So I forgot to say that. I'm sorry, Claire.
Okay, so we can go to the first slide. So I think the reason I'm really excited about talking about these kiddos with you guys is because I have had so much experience in the weeds working in pediatrics, and also I do the pediatric residency training on behavior and development for the Children's Hospital primary care residents. So I feel like I have a very good idea of what the opportunity is and what the limitations are, right? You're not seeing families where you're going to be able most of the time to sit down for a full hour and really dig in. So I'm going to try and make this talk really relevant to give you tools and insights that you can readily integrate into your encounters with families as you are doing what you typically would be doing, right, in an encounter with a family. So the reason this is especially important is because often when there are challenges within the room itself, right? You've got a child who's very reactive to the whole sensory experience, or you have a kid who is having a very hard time with you, maybe a new person, and is being very cautious and non-cooperative. Like, these are often the kids you're going to see where it may be a more challenging encounter because of how they're wired and how they react to the world around them. So that's why I think this is especially important. So I'm going to start with just this whole specter of temperament, right? That often we're looking a lot at development. What's happening developmentally? Is a child sitting up? Are they standing up? How many words are they saying? How are they communicating? In order to assess how they're doing. A big missing piece of the puzzle that I have found writ large, but especially in pediatric training, at least with the residents I work with, is not getting a lot about the critical importance of temperament, which is, I think of, so let me preface this by saying that I think very much in operational terms. And I know you all are scientists, but what I'm going to share with you is like, there's a lot of science behind this. But in my day-to-day work, what I'm trying to do is really make this concrete for parents and digestible. And so talk in ways that they experience their spirited kids, right? So temperament is the child's way of approaching the world. I often will tell a parent it's almost like the filter through which, or the lens through which they experience the world, right? It's constitutional. It's something we are all born with and not something children choose or that parents create. In each of the slides, you're going to see there's very important messaging that I have found really helps parents move from frustration and anger to empathy and understanding, which makes it more likely that they are going to be able to respond to their child in the way their child needs, right? Like I was saying before, to be their rock when they are going through the storms. And so just this mind shift that, like, I have a great kid having a difficult moment. This is not like they are not purposefully trying to mortify me and target when they're flipping out, because I did all the great preparatory work. And on the way to Target, we talked about how we're only getting food today and we're not going to be getting any Legos or any trucks. And the child's totally sanguine about it until they get to Target and they see the trucks and they see the magnet tiles and they see all the things and they flip out. That their kids are not trying to work their last nerve. They're not spoiled or bad. They are wired in a way that their reactions to their experiences in the world are very big, and that is part of their temperament. Okay, so we can move to the next slide. So when we look at temperament and you really delve into it, you know, Stella and Chess were the original researchers who pioneered this work on understanding there were 8 key elements or traits, temperament traits that could help you understand the meaning of a child's behavior. We don't have time for that today, but if you're more interested in learning about temperament, there's lots of great stuff that will help you learn about like activity level and regularity, and approach and avoidance, and things that we now understand are hardwired into kids, right? Which is why you can line up 8 kids and expose them to the very same stimulus, right? Like a preschool where a teacher is absent and there's a substitute. And you've got one kid who's running to this new person, so excited. Hi, I'm Johnny. What's your name? And they're ready to go. And you have another kid who's clinging for dear life and feels so overwhelmed by this shift in their world they weren't expecting. That, like, I can't say for sure. There's a lot of variables that influence a child's behavior, but temperament is often a big piece of the puzzle that gets missed. Okay. So, what I'm going to focus on today is a group of kids we think of as highly sensitive kids. I have come to call them big reactors because my work is every day in the trenches with families who come to see me because of challenging behaviors they're experiencing. And these families, that's what it feels like to them. Like, why are their reactions so big? Why is everything a 5-alarm fire? Why did they go from 0 to 60 in a nanosecond? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just helping you understand some of the key traits of highly sensitive children. I want to preface this by saying that this is what I have found in clinical practice over all of these years. There's a lot written out there, and that codify these things, you know, in different ways. So what I'm sharing with you is what I've learned from working with thousands of kids and seeing all of these sort of common patterns that help us understand these highly sensitive kids and why they respond the way they do. And then what I'm going to do is focus on how you can share this information organically and in a loving, supportive way with families as you're working with them. Okay, so children with this temperament trait tend to be more vulnerable than kids who are more go with the flow, right? So there's Thomas Boyce. He's an amazing psychologist. He's on Elisa's podcast recently, Raising Good Humans, and it's a fascinating episode. He goes deep, deep, deep into the science of high sensitivity. And he's the one who coined these phrases, which have been so incredibly helpful to so many of us, about sort of orchids versus dandelions. Now, of course, it's a continuum, right? But just to understand this temperament trait writ large, the orchids are the highly sensitive kids. These are, people think 25 to 30% of the population, you know, out there, if you are a highly sensitive person, that these are people who are wired to process their experiences in the world very deeply and intensely. That's where I got this idea of the filter. It's almost like we all, as humans, we're not a monolithic group, and we have different lenses and filters. So the orchids are the kids, it's almost like they don't have a filter. In my day and age, you know, in the 1960s and 70s, we were called like the thin-skinned kids, right? Like, just buck up, toughen up. It was very pejorative, unfortunately. You know, my parents called me Sarah Bernhardt. Many of you may not even know who Sarah Bernhardt is, but she was this very melodramatic actress. And it was not understood that really what we were seeing were kids who had outsized reactions because the way they were registering and processing their experiences in the world was so much deeper and more intense than other kids on the other end of the spectrum who Thomas Boyce calls dandelions, right? Because like a dandelion, like you can throw a dandelion in the middle of the desert and forget about watering it, forget about paying any attention to it, and it thrives, right? These are kids who just by nature are adaptable. Um, I think of these kids as the kids who make their parents look so good. It's like you're at the playground. Oh, it's time to leave the playground. No problem. They put their bucket down. They come. They hop into the car seat. Then you've got the orchids, right? The kids who are very sensitive, who have a hard time with transitions, who have a harder time being flexible because their systems get more overwhelmed easily because they don't have that filter. So everything is processed at this very intense level. And therefore, even something as benign as stopping in the sandbox and having to get in the car can be distressing to them. And they're falling out and they're wet noodles and parents can't pick them up. And it's very, very stressful for these parents. So again, there's everything in between, but what's important to remember is these kids are not overreacting on purpose. Their systems are getting overwhelmed and they come up with all sorts of coping mechanisms to manage this overwhelm that I'm going to go into further. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So here are the common traits of the kids I see who I call big reactors. So we can go to the next slide. Is that at the most elemental level, as I was saying, these kids register their feelings and experiences more deeply than other kids. Parents often describe them as being ecstatic or enraged because of their intensity, right? It's like there's no middle register. And as I said before, they're also, called orchids because just like orchids, too much water and they're wilting, too little water and they're wilting. You move them one step in the wrong direction and they're having a big reaction, right? So that's what it feels like to be these young kids. The next trait is that they are keenly tuned in to others. Okay. So these are kids who pick up on everything, right? So here are some really good recent examples. Like a parent will think that they are being very stoic, right? They've just gotten some difficult news and they're being very stoic and their back is even to their child. They're at the sink doing dishes. And all of a sudden their 3, 4, or 5-year-old comes up to them and says, "Mommy, what's wrong?" Like they pick up on everything. When parents are having conflict, they will also often do things like, "Mommy, kiss daddy. Mommy, kiss daddy and give daddy a hug right now." Like they are absorbing things at such an intense level that you're going to start to see as I go through these traits how it coalesces into these very big meltdowns that these kids tend to have, and the inflexibility, and the intense need for control, because on the inside, this is more than most young kids or even older kids can really process appropriately and react to. It's often, by the way, why parents will tell me that their kids can't watch Disney movies, because they get completely overly focused on details that many other kids miss. For example, I made a major parenting mistake, which I feel very badly about still, like 30 years later. But when my son was 4, 30 years ago, the original Lion King came out, and I took him with 3 other friends, right? We get out of the movie. His 3 friends are like, "Oh, that was so cool," like Scar and Simba, and they're all about the action. My son is in hysterics. And I said, "Sam, like, what's the matter, buddy?" And he totally understood that Simba felt responsible for his dad's death. And to him, that was so, can you imagine being 4 years old and all of a sudden this specter that like a child could be responsible for their parents' death, like completely obsessed with this. We had so much reworking to go through to help him make sense of this. But it's such a good example of how what's happening for these kids is that they are they're processing every one of their experiences in the world so deeply, and their system just can't handle it, right? And so one of these things is they have this incredible sense of self-awareness and also awareness of others, right? So these are the kids who will say things in elevators like, why do you have squiggly skin? Or why is your voice so squeaky? Like they'll make comments on things that are mortifying to parents, not because they want to be offensive. It's because they just notice everything. And you could see how at some point that could get very overwhelming. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, these kids, because of their sensitivity, it's not just emotional or experiential, right? They're very responsive to their experiences in the world. Any changes, a new person, I've had kids where they notice that you change the furniture and they're flipping out. I had a couple girls, I couldn't believe it, simultaneously, who flipped out when their moms wore their hair up and insisted they wear their hair down because they had made this association that, like, my mommy looks like this. So when the mom either cut her hair really short or put it up in a ponytail, they got very uncomfortable, right? So that's the level for some of these kids that they are getting triggered, okay? So they're getting triggered by their experiences in the world, but they also get more triggered from a sensory perspective. I see this quite frequently. And it's important, of course, to differentiate this from sensory processing disorder, because a lot of these highly sensitive kids, you could see there's like a Venn diagram with like anxiety, with ASD1, because you'll see later when we start to talk about the inflexibility, these kids can be very inflexible because they're desperately trying to control a world that feels very overwhelming, right? So we have to tease out, is this high sensitivity or is this ASD1? Same thing for sensory processing. What I find with these kids clinically is that they tend to have more higher reactivity to sensory experiences. They may have the clothing thing, the tags. A lot of these kids, for them, it's like a visual thing. They'll get very stuck on like how their clothes look. Like one girl said there were too many dots on her clothes and she didn't want dots on her clothes. So they can get very particular about what feels comfortable to them or not. They're often more responsive maybe to sounds or even lights. They sometimes have, a hard time regulating their body reactions. And again, we need to differentiate that from bona fide sensory processing disorder. And what I've seen is often for the highly sensitive kids with some support, they can adapt, meaning they hate the hair dryers and the automatic toilets, right? But if an attuned parent who says, I know it's really uncomfortable, here are your headphones, or why don't you leave the bathroom and I'll flush the toilet, and those kids can adapt, great, right? That's just great attuned parenting, and that's providing the child the tool they need to adapt. When the sensory reactivity is interfering in the child's development, like it's affecting their ability to engage in a comfortable way at home or at school, then that's often the time at which I'm going to make referrals for an OT evaluation, right? Because it's our job, you and me, to kind of suss some of these things out. And that's for me kind of the demarcation, is if I give the parents some tools to help the child adapt and they can, then we know we stay the course because it's working. But when it's not, then of course we need, to dig in more deeply. But the important point here also is that as we're putting ourselves in these kids' shoes, imagine that you already are one of these kids who's over tuned into everything and therefore getting dysregulated more easily, right? By all of these experiences you're having in the world. And then you add the sensory piece, which is causing them discomfort, right? The clothes don't feel right. The food, my rice is too close to my chicken. You know, the noises are too loud. There's too much physicality going on around them, too much action. So they're already more prone to discomfort. And then you add the sensory piece, and you can imagine how sometimes life just feels really overwhelming to them. And by the way, as I'm making these points, one of the things I want you to be thinking about is, like, in your sessions with parents, as you see these things emerge, right? Like a child, for example, who gets very cold very quickly, right? And like doesn't want their clothes taken off, or they're very reactive to you touching them or looking in their eyes. That is a great opportunity to do, you know, the teachable moment, right? And those are the moments where I might say, I know, you know what? This is not misbehavior. It looks to me like Charlie, this is really uncomfortable to him. And that happens. You know what? Kids are not all the same. And maybe if you have multiple kids, you know that, like, you could expose your child to the same sensory experience, you know, putting water over their head to give them a bath, and one loves it and the other one can't stand it and is shrieking at the top of his lungs. That's not on purpose. It's information that's telling us that this is an uncomfortable experience for them, and our job is to figure out how to help them with this. So right now, Charlie is having a really hard time with this. Let's see if we put a blanket over him, and he sits on your lap and you hold him, because I do have to do the exam, but I know it's uncomfortable and I'm going to try and do it as quickly as possible. Like, that to me, like, if you approach your sessions with parents in this way, where you are validating their experience, which is usually mortification, because you are the most important person in their world. I mean, hands down, you know, parents idealize their healthcare providers, and what you say carries the most weight. So when you take 1 second to just acknowledge that, I know this feels really uncomfortable and you really want him to behave, but he's actually not misbehaving. This is hard for him. I get that. And let's partner to figure out how we're going to help make this easier for him. Like, that is gold. Like, I cannot overstate what a contribution you are making to this child and family's life, to be seen, to give this parent usually a very different message about their child. Because a lot of the times the messages they're getting from even their own families is like, what's wrong with your kid? Like, get with the program. Like, why is he flipping out? You have the opportunity to give them a new way of seeing their child, building that empathy and sharing the tools. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we get to a real biggie, right? So as I mentioned before, and we'll go more into it, like, a major factor with these kids are intense meltdowns when something happens that they don't expect or not the way they want, right? Because they're over processing and their systems are getting overloaded. So in addition to the more intense and frequent meltdowns, these kids also tend to have a very, very intense need for control, and they can be very rigid and inflexible. And what I have come to understand as I work with these kids and families is that it's a coping mechanism. As irrational and non-functional as it might be, it is their way of trying to feel like they are in control over their world, right? So they will, like, in play, orchestrate and tell everybody exactly what they have to do. And if anybody veers from the script, it's very upsetting to them. Now, I know many of you are thinking, well, yeah, those are autistic kids. And yes, kids on the spectrum, this is a major challenge for them. But I will tell you that hundreds of the kids I see who are not on the spectrum also can be very rigid and have a very strong need for control, and they may not be on the spectrum. So again, we don't have tons of time to really parse all this out, but I'm making the point that it's something it's something to think about and not have a knee-jerk reaction to, because that's what I see a lot. As soon as the kid is really rigid, and if things don't go exactly the way they want, they're going to the neurodevelopmental person for $5,000. Like, a lot of times that's not necessary. In my work with families, a lot of what I'm doing is really helping them with this specific challenge because it's so pervasive. So for example, I'll give you an in the weeds story. So I had a family with a 4-year-old who was going to preschool. She was very highly sensitive. She wanted to control everything in order to feel safe in her world. We problem solved a lot of things, but in this case, she went to preschool. Took a lot of time for her to adapt and feel comfortable, and they stayed the course and they were amazing. They validated her feelings, but they didn't just bring her home. They trusted the process and she adapted. And then, of course, what happens with these kids is once she adapted, when she was at school, all of her emotion and energy got connecting to the caregivers. So when the mom came back at the end of the day, it was a disaster. And this child became very controlling, and you have to do this, and you didn't bring the right snack, and the mom was bringing books to read with her. The mom was working to exhaustion to try and have this child be happy that the mom was coming to her, while the child was mortifying her by saying things like, go away, I don't want you here, while all the other kids are running to their parents' arms, right? And so, she wanted to walk without holding her mom's hand. It was everything. And this mom was spending 25 minutes in this, what I call the gray zone, hoping against hope that she was trying to get her child to get with the program and leave the school. And she was having terrible feelings about her child and terrible feelings about herself. What is wrong with this child? What is wrong with me? She's spewing such horrible venom, and there has to be something very wrong. I'm a terrible parent. She's a terrible child. But basically, at a cellular level, that's how she felt. Once we started to working together, I realized that what was happening was that this was not personal at all. That this transition and the feeling of lack of control was so triggering to this child that she was just totally in downstairs brain mode, right? No parasympathetic functioning whatsoever. And she was at a primitive level of functioning, and what she was spewing was just pure dysregulation. And what she needed wasn't 20 minutes of this mom trying to make it all better, which, by the way, often for these kids only escalates them further. What she needed was this. I know, Melanie, it's really hard to go from school to home. I'm going to be your helper. You have two great choices. You can get into the car on your own, or I can be a helper and I'll help you move through this difficult situation. And literally, that is what was the total game changer, was just not engaging, not fueling her flame, seeing it for what it was, which is, I have a great kid having a difficult moment. This is tough for her. She doesn't mean what she says. Her body is acting before her brain. All of this venom is, as a colleague, Dr. Sarah Bren, calls it lava, which I find really, it just let it flow. It's lava. It's an eruption. Your child is not a sociopath. They are just in insane mode. And what they need is for you to be their rock. And the first day it was very difficult. She literally physically had to move her, buckle her in, put on a Tony box, acted like nothing had happened, stayed connected, but did not react, stop kicking, stop screaming, none of that. And that is what helped this child regulate. So it's very important to keep that in mind, that these kids don't mean to be controlling or fascist dictators, right? They're going to want to tell you where everybody sits at the table and what playground you go to. And they're the ones that have to choose what every kid in the family watches. And what they need is, I know, Marielle, you really love this playground and it's the one you want to go to. I totally feel you. And it's your sister's turn to choose. I know that's really hard, but we are going to go to that park. And if you need to be upset about it, that's totally fine. Those are your feelings, but we are going to go to the park. And once we're there, you can decide what you want to do. You can observe, you can play, but that's up to you. Like that, in a nutshell, is what helps these parents in these situations, is to acknowledge and not try to talk the child out of their feelings. All that does is give fodder for the child to up the ante, right? The parent, the kid saying they don't want to start school, and the parents like, oh, but you're going to love this new school. Like, you have an amazing teacher and the playground's so much better. And all this kid is saying is, I hate that playground. I hate playgrounds. That's the stupidest playground in the world. Like, they don't mean anything that they say. they're not feeling validated, and so they up the ante to prove their point. So what they need is total validation of their experience. But the key is that has gotten lost in this age of gentle parenting is the boundary and the limit that scaffolds the adaptation. If we are constantly accommodating to kids, then they don't learn the flexibility. They learn that if I have a meltdown, then we'll get to go to the playground I want to go to, and the child ends up sucking up all the oxygen out of the family because everybody just is walking on eggshells and wants peace, and the child in the family who's the adapter is often sacrificing their own needs for the child, which is decidedly not only not good for that child, but it's also not good for the big reactor to be the lightning rod of the family. So I'm going to move on to the next slide because there's so much to say about this, and we can, of course, get back to it in the conversation, but that's a
Claire,
biggie.
I'm going to interrupt you because I know you had said that was okay. Just that last
Yes.
discussion brought up two questions I think are relevant right now. One is among these big reactors, do you see some who internalize and some who externalize? So some who are going to go anxiety versus some of the kids who are going to go tantrums?
100%. And actually, that's perfect timing because the next trait is this trait of being more fearful and cautious by nature, which, you could call it stress, fear, caution, anxiety. The way these kids express or act out the inner overwhelm that their experiences can be quite different because of course kids are not a monolithic group. So you have kids who may be more explosive, right, and more controlling, like the kids I've been talking about, because they tend to come to our attention more quickly than the kids who, when they are feeling fear, they're all feeling fearful and anxious, right? It's like, I don't know what's happening here, so I have to assert some control here to make sure that I know exactly what's happening, and we're going to do things exactly my way because that makes me feel safe. So that's going to look different for different kids, right? So for some kids, yes, they are going to be more internal, and often those are the kids who tend to be kind of like the hyper pleasers. That's the way they control their world, is if I just do everything that everybody wants, then I can control the outcome. That's really what they're trying to do, is in their little brains as early, by the way, as 2, 3, 4, 5. They are trying to figure out, how can I control the situation? So yes, it can look very, very different. Do you want to ask the next question?
I think the other one that was related is, what if the behavior they're doing is something like saying that they're always sick and they feel like vomiting in particular, which I know you see a lot. And how can physicians kind of tell the difference, help parents guide the difference if the symptom isn't quite as easy or the behavior isn't quite as easy to dismiss?
Yeah. So these are the really tough questions. And I'm going to I'm always aware in this venue of, like, the context is we can't dig super deep and get through everything, but I want to give you a meaningful answer. So that's just my caveat, that like sometimes there's more yes buts. And on that note, I am here for you guys to write to me if you want to dig deeper, you want more information on this stuff. As Marielle said, I have a blog with over 150 blogs on challenging behaviors and highly sensitive kids. Like, there's a lot more out there. But for now, what here's how I think of it. What I see quite frequently, and I also work in elementary schools as a consultant and preschool, so this happens a lot, where the kid is triggered by some discomfort. They've learned that they say they're sick or they're not feeling well, they can avoid the discomfort. This is like as old as time and the most understandable response, right? We've all felt that way, where like we've learned as adults to like face our fears and to work through the discomfort. Otherwise, we would not grow and our worlds would be very small. But for these young kids, they're doing this about everything, about school, about swim lessons and soccer and things that they would love. But because of their anxiety, like, what is this place? Who are these people? Are they going to be nice to me? Am I going to know how to swim? Is the teacher going to make sure I don't drown? Like, these are processors. These kids process, their brains never turn off. So you could imagine how they get their panties in a bun, because they are over processing everything and it can become paralyzing. And so the way I've approached it is that I try and really figure out as best I can, is this an avoidance or is like this child really sick? Now, of course, you guys are in a better position to do that than I am, but I do find in a lot of these situations that it's really anxiety. And if we enable that, that may feel like the loving thing, right? To give the child an out. But what I've learned over all these years is it's actually not the loving thing because it's a missed opportunity for the child to see that they can work through the fears. So here's what it might look like in practice. The mom says, we're going to swim class. And the kid says, oh, I can't go. I have a stomach ache. We're never going to be getting into like an argument with a child about whether they have a stomach ache or not, right? That's like a bottomless pit of frustration. So what I found works is I hear you, sweetie. Sometimes bellies hurt. And of course, parents usually have good instincts about this. And like an hour before they were happily playing and they did not have a stomach ache, they haven't eaten anything. They're like, I think this is anxiety. I recommend to those parents, I hear you, sweetie. You sounds like your stomach doesn't feel so good. We're still going to swim lesson. That's my job, is to take you there. Once we're there, you can decide what you need to do for your body. Because here's what I find is if you don't provide the exposure, there's no opportunity for actually working through this anxiety. And the children stay fearful and they start to develop a self-narrative that they're not resilient, they're not competent, they can't work through their fears. What I find is when you do not get into an argument about why they should be happy about going to this class or whether they have a headache or a stomach ache, but you still say, we're still going to go. Of course, like it's your body. Like I don't control your body. Once we're there, you decide. You can be a watcher. I have a lot of tools. I can't go into at length now. They're on my site under articles about positive discomfort and kids who are hesitant and anxious. But I've got lots of tools. And one of them is that you could just be a detective. Like if your belly's not feeling well and you don't want to get in the pool, like you can stay on the side and you can take notes, or you can take notes in your brain about all the things the kids are learning, and you could report back to me later. Like I give them a lot of tools to move them their focus away from perseverating on the anxiety and giving them like a productive tool to focus their energy on. But writ large, once we've figured out that it's the anxiety talking, and it's very hard for parents at first because it feels mean. Like my child saying, I can't go to soccer, my leg hurts. And you say, I hear you, bud. And like you do all the things, how can we help make your leg feel better? And we're also going to go to soccer, but you can be a watcher because you're still learning. Once they see that the avoidance is not working, that's when the adaptation happens. That's true, by the way, about any limit with kids, right? As long as they think there's a loophole, like you're trying to convince them to agree to put down the screen and get ready for bed, they totally pick up on the fact that this limit is only going to be set if they agree to it, because the parent's basically trying to convince them. In my world, what I've realized the major foundational shift is you don't control your children. You have no control over them. They are human beings. What comes out of their mouth and what they do with their body, only they control. What you control is the situation. So think about even the swimming example I just gave you. You can't mind meld with your child and make them agree to want to go to swim class. And in fact, the more you try to make them agree, the more that's fodder for a fight. And so what I find is once you just acknowledge, like, okay, that's how you feel, fair, and we're still going to go and you'll figure it out from there. That's controlling the situation. That's a really good example in the screen time example, with kids who won't move from screens to bed, which is like probably a whole nother conversation that we can have, but focusing on the limit setting aspect of it, it's not the screen aspect of it. What these kids need is this. I see it's really hard to put down the screen and get ready for bedtime. Totally feel you. And going upstairs now is a have to. You have two great choices. You can put the screen down and we can go up into, we will have extra time, 5 extra minutes for books because you did your job. So we have more time for books. If you choose not to, no problem. I'll be a helper. It may feel really uncomfortable, but I'll take the screen and I'll help you move through this difficult moment. and we won't have the extra 5 minutes because I needed to help you do your job, right? So this is like, you could do this with a 4 or 5-year-old. Like, your job now is to put the screen down and go upstairs. I can't make you do that. So this is a lot of what I'm saying to kids, by the way, is, you know what? It's your body. Like, I can't make you agree to put the screen down. So here are your two great choices. That's where I came up with this whole two great choices idea, was to get parents out of these pernicious power struggles. Now, I know I've gotten far afield and we're at 12:44, so I'm going to try and get through the rest of the slides, and then I'm just going to open it up for questions. But on this note of fearful and cautious, like, now I hope you see why it makes perfect sense that these kids would be more fearful and cautious. Because when they go, like, you take two kids to a fair and there's a bouncy house. One kid is like, bouncy house, great. And they run in and they're bouncing. And the other kid is like, what is this place? And who are these people? And are they going to bump into me? And am I going to know what to do? And am I going to feel embarrassed because I don't know how to jump? And you can see how they get paralyzed and stuck. And then you get the avoidance. I'm not going in there, right? So with these kids, again, what I find what they need is, I know this is a new thing. It feels really scary. Makes total sense. Let's see what we can learn about this thing. So there's like a whole set of steps I do with families, again, that we probably don't have time for. But the idea is total validation, lots of scaffolding, and boundary, meaning like, we're still going to go. I had this just the other day with a kid who was on vacation, and she's a homebody and she just wanted to stay in the hotel. And the family's plan was to go to this amazing science museum in Chicago. And the parent, like the whole family, basically ends up missing out on everything because she won't go. The redo was, I know, Samantha, you don't want to go. I hear you. You'd much rather stay in the hotel. Okay, fair. I'm not here to convince you to like the plan, but that is our plan. We are going to go to the museum. And once we go there, you decide. You can sit, you can participate. That's up to you. They did the tough work. They physically got her there. They could not get her out. Now, I know it's not a panacea, but I see that dynamic happen multiple times a week with my families. And that's what these fearful and cautious kids need. Many of you probably know about the SPACE program out of the Yale Child Study Center. I actually haven't done it, but I'm very familiar with it. And I would say that a lot of what I'm doing with families is very synergistic with like validation, tools, boundary. Like, that's the take home for these kids. Okay, next slide. Okay, so low tolerance for frustration, right? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I feel like I've kind of painted a good picture. These kids have a low frustration tolerance because of that control thing, right? The second they can't do something, their magnetile tower falls down, they can't get their doll's clothing on the right way. They write the letter P and it turns out as a B. They're losing it because it's so triggering to them. Like, in their brains, it's like, I want this to look this way, this picture to look this way, this tower to look that way. And when it doesn't happen that way, they get triggered into upset very, very quickly. So you start to see why there are so many meltdowns and why they can be very intense. The other things, I'm not going to have you change the slides. They're in the slides and you guys can have the slides. Plus, I have an article on every single one of these traits, a full article. But that's why there's more perfectionism, a lot of being sore at losing, hate being corrected, all because it triggers their shame. These kids live very close to shame. They are triggered into shame very, very quickly. So the second they're not the winner, they don't get the goal in the soccer, they are very distressed. And what they need, again, is tons of validation. I know you wanted the P you didn't want it to look that way. That's really uncomfortable to you. I totally feel you. And that happens. Like, as humans, that happens. And would you like a break? Or I have some ideas about how we can work on that. Would you like to hear them? By the way, that's a biggie for me, is asking these kids for permission to give them input, because they often feel overwhelmed very quickly. When we launch into, do this or do that or keep trying, it tends to get them more dysregulated. and in fight flight mode than when you totally validate. I know it didn't look the way you wanted it to look. I know it feels really badly when you didn't get the goal you wanted, and just sit with it and let them know that that's the most human thing in the world. Like we rush way too much in this day and age. They, oh, failure is part of learning, which is true. The step we miss with these kids is it feels terrible to fail. We all feel that way. Nobody wants to fail. Like, let's be honest. Of course, we have to learn to deal with it. But I find that once you just say, I get it, that felt awful. You really wanted it to look this way, or you wanted to get this goal, or you wanted to be the winner. I totally feel you. And that's going to happen a lot. And then you tell your own stories and you go onto YouTube and you look at, videos of John McEnroe, maybe not John McEnroe, but like, other tennis players who are amazing and who've had horrible games, or you look at Lionel Messi and horrible games he had where he couldn't make a goal, and you say that's being human and it's okay, and I'm going to give you space, and when you're ready to try again, let me know. Like, with these kids, the parenting pitfall is often doing way too much to make it all better.